الثانية يغفر الله لكم. لتعجيل فرج الإمام صاحب العصر والزمان. الثالثة بأعلى أصواتكم. Just before we begin, could everyone put their phones on silent, as some people have asked that they've got disrupted with phones ringing. Don't need to turn it off, just put it on silent so at least, there's no disruption with mobile phones. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة. أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Whenever one is to choose a representative or a trustee or someone that they have to execute their orders, one will choose someone that represents them most. For example, if you take a look at the rulers of the world, you look at their representatives and those around them, they're a picture of them. They act like they act. As Confucius once said when he was asked by a king, he said, tell me, the king asked Confucius, he said, tell me, how do I make my cabinet, the members of his board, how to make my cabinet honest? He said, by being honest yourself. Because the people that you will have around you, the people that surround you, the people that advise you are your ilk. They're of your ilk. They're like you in every single way. They represent you. Otherwise, you would not put them in place. For example, the Queen of England would never put a Muslim as a representative because she is the head of state. She is the head of the Church or Anglican or Church of England faith. So she would never put a Muslim to represent her. And likewise, a Muslim leadership would not put in place a priest to represent them, because this would not give the correct picture that they want to portray. Firstly. And secondly, this person would not represent them in the manner that they want to be represented. He will not have their qualities. Tonight, being the fourth night of Muharram, generally is the night where we commemorate the first martyr of the martyrs of Karbala. Although this martyr was not killed in Karbala, he's always recognized as Awwal Shaheed, or the first Shaheed, the first martyr that's associated with the mission of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamu alayh. And this man is Muslim ibn Aqil, alayhi salam. Now, those that have been given the opportunity to visit his grave in Kufa, alaykum salam, will feel when you enter there, honestly, it's one of the, out of all the places I've been to, it is different to any place. You really feel sad there. You feel a feeling that overcomes you that you cannot comprehend. Alaykum salam. Firstly, when we speak about a man like Muslim Aqil, we look at what does the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam say about him. He says, where the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, asks the Messenger of God if he likes his brother Aqil. Aqil being the brother of Imam Ali. Imam Ali alayhi salam asked the Messenger of God, do you like my brother Aqil? The Messenger of God says, I like him hubbain, which means two reasons or two loves. I have love for him twice. One, he says for him, that he's a good man. And he says, and the second is because Abu Talib loves him. Now we can establish a lot of things just from this statement. For starters, we establish here one of the biggest fallacies that's spread in the Islamic world, that Abu Talib is an unbeliever or a mushrik, God forbid. And it's really spread when they made the movie Al-Risala, the message. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. Al-Risala is one of those movies I really love to bash, because it's one of those movies that is made and totally misrepresents Islam. Even though at the beginning it says that this movie was even authorized by the Shia, which is a fallacy in itself. It wasn't authorized by the Shia, because the whole movie does not represent Islam in the way it was meant to be represented. Even to the fact where they also made a cartoon called The Message, and really good animation, the same animation that you got from the Prince of Egypt. Really good animation. They spent big bucks on it. And my brother once said to me, this is a really good movie because it shows, my kids enjoy it. Until one day he said to me, his daughter came up to him and said, Baba, I don't like Abu Talib. He said, why? He says, he's irritating. So even the show makes the child feel in that manner, that they try to make this man an unbeliever. And his sin, is the same sin that we have. The love of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is why we're called unbelievers by these masses. Why we're called Rafida, why we're called Kuffar, why our blood is permissible to be spilled. Why we're not accepted to marry from their families. Why what we kill is not permissible for them to eat. Because of this same love. Except with the case of Abu Talib, he is the father of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He's the father of Amir al-Mu'mineen, so he has been condemned for life. Just as many people that were of the offspring of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam that were condemned, and they were killed, and they were tortured, and they had to spread out in the land. It got to the point that they say at the time of the Khilafah, at the end of Mansur al-Dawaniq's Khilafah to Harun al-Rashid, they used to say that the follower of Ahl al-Bayt would deny knowing who his father was. They'd ask you, who is your father? You would deny, I don't even know who my father is. Why? Because the moment they knew who your father was, they'll know you were a Shia and you were killed. Imagine that you had to get to the point where you could not even associate yourself with your family because of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. So in the case of Abu Talib, this tradition makes it clear amongst many other traditions that the Prophet shows the belief of Abu Talib in this tradition. He shows the belief that he had, because no one will say, for example, I like so-and-so because Shimon Peres likes him. No one would like someone because an enemy likes them. And had Abu Talib, God forbid, been a mushrik, then he would be an enemy to Islam, and Rasulullah would not use his love as a measurement. Then it moves on to say, the messenger of God, and then he says, وَمِنْ وُلْدِهِ, and of the children of Aqil. Now, the fact that the Prophet says وَمِنْ وُلْدِهِ means that Muslim is alive at the time of the Prophet, whether he's a child, because the Prophet would say from him will come a child, but he doesn't. He says from his child, meaning the child is present. He says you will have a child that will die for the love, he says to Imam Ali, of your child, in protection of your child. And then he says فَتَدْمَعْ عَلَيْهِ عُيُونَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَتُصَلِّ عَلَيْهِ الْمَلَائِكَةُ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. So the eyes of the believers will become teary over Muslim, and the most nearest of the angels, the nearest most of the angels will pray upon him. This is the status that the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam attributes to Muslim. And this should suffice without us even continuing of his status. But like all great men, he led his life in greatness. Even our traditions confirm his attendance in the Battle of Siffin, and he was one of the fighters in Siffin in the ranks, that he fought alongside Abdullah ibn Ja'far, his cousin, alongside the ranks of Al-Hasan wal Hussein alayhim as-salam. So he was one of those that fought alongside the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Sorry, the commander of the faithful alayhi salam. So he fought alongside the Imam of his time. Now, when it comes to the Imam sending him to Kufa, it begins like this. This is a story. Basically, what's happened here is, as we had mentioned in previous nights, Yazid has assumed power. And when someone assumes power, especially someone that is not wanted, they have to start to pick up the pieces, see where they can get the allegiance from here and there. And he has many people, even amongst the Umayyads, that don't want him in power. They don't see him fit to rule. They want someone else. And as usual, amongst this cesspool, everyone's vying for power. Everyone wants to rule. Everyone wants to take control. Everyone wants to be in charge. No one wants to be number two. Everyone wants to be in charge. So Yazid's attempting to get allegiance from the Imam. And we know that the Imam leaves the city of Medina. He leaves it in 28 of Rajab, in the year 60 after Hijrah. He leaves on the 28th of Rajab, and he arrives on the 3rd of Sha'ban. That's when he arrives in Makkah al-Mukarramah. And we know he's in Makkah al-Mukarramah for approximately 4 months. He's there doing that 4 months and 5 days. He's there doing da'wah, calling people to see his support and getting people to stand against this tyrant Yazid. Because the position of who Yazid was and the status, which we'll talk over the various nights when we're being part and parcel of it. Now, for the 4 months he's there, during this time he's receiving letters from Kufa. And these letters are saying basically that we want you to come and lead us. You are our Imam. We choose you. We will give you allegiance. We will support you. And you'll get one letter with several signatories on it. Not only one signature, not two, sometimes 4 or 5. In fact, some of these letters, they say that he received in one day 600 letters with multiple signatures on them. They all accumulated to 12,000 letters with so many signatures on them. So could you imagine how many people, and you get this many letters, and you're wanted in Mecca, that Yazid sent people out to kill you if you don't give allegiance, and you've got support somewhere, this is where you're going to head. But the Imam has to check out the environment in which he wants to go to, the place that he is turning to. So this is where he sends Muslim Aqil alayhi salam. He sends him to go see what Kufa is like. Are these people as honest as their letters suggest? Because remember, Kufa's got a history. There's something special about Kufa, God knows what it is. Because Imam Ali alayhi salam established his capital there. Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman, al-Mehdi ajallah farajahu sharif, will establish his capital there. There's something special about Kufa. In Kufa, this is where Nuh built his ark. He lived in Masjid al-Sahla. Those that go to Masjid al-Sahla in Kufa, that was the house of Nuh alayhi salam. That was his house. He lived in Masjid al-Sahla. So there's something about Kufa. It is a city of alliance and it is a city of betrayal. Both. Some of the best people came from there and some of the worst came from there. In fact, once I was reading in a tradition when they wanted to kill Nabi Idris. Nabi Idris was before Musa alayhi salam. The narration says that 400 Kufans were sent to kill him. Now when I read this, that even to that point, this is at the time of Nabi Idris, that they were known of this betrayal and this treachery. So anyway, the Imam sends him to tread and tread carefully, check out the people, see if they are what their letters suggest. Now, and also to attain their allegiance. Now, there's a very important point here, just before we get to this. To attain someone's allegiance, in general terms, is like, for example, in our terms, attaining allegiance is given a vote. That I vote this person, that I think this person will be worthy to rule. However, this isn't the case when it comes to the Imam. When you give bay'ah to the Imam, and you give bay'ah to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah Azza wa Jal, when He speaks about giving allegiance to the Messenger, He equates it as giving allegiance to who? To God. In the Quran, He says those that have given allegiance, the ones that gave beneath the tree, the allegiance to the Messenger of God, they gave allegiance to God. And He says, Yadullah fawqa aydihim, that God's hand is above their hand. This isn't in the literal sense, unless you're a Wahhabi and you believe that God has a hand. That God's hand is above their hand. They have given allegiance to Allah Azza wa Jal. They have given their allegiance to God. Now, Allah is their Rabb. Allah is the creator, whether you accept or reject. So why would I have to give Him allegiance? The Messenger of God, this is the argument, just before we continue, this is the argument that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam had with the Khawarij. When they said to him, they said the Hakiman, the two men that we put to sort out your problem with Muawiyah, when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, after the battle of Siffin, they didn't come to a result. The people agreed. The Khawarij and Muawiyah agreed. We get a representative from each party. And they choose who rules. Muawiyah, of course, got to choose his trusted Amr ibn al-As. And the people chose Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, whom Imam Ali didn't even want. But it's like you saying, I want Mr. X to represent me. They say, no, it's Mr. Y. You say, but Mr. X represents me best. And they say, no, we'll tell you. Like someone tells you what's good for you. You know what ails you. You know what you need, but people choose for you. They chose, Imam Ali alayhi salam would have put Malik al-Ashtar, but they put Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And this guy is one of the filthiest guys in the history of Islam. In fact, he is one of the people that is most cursed, that he will be placed with the one that killed Ali ibn Abi Talib, with Abdurrahman ibn Muljam al-Muradi, according to traditions. This is his place in the fire of hell. He's with Abdurrahman ibn Muljam. This is how filthy this person was. So anyway, the Khawarij said these two came to the conclusion, and you're out. And then the Imam says to them, and it's a very nice saying, he says to them, the Kaaba, if people stopped going to do Hajj, they said yes. He said, and people stopped praying towards it, yes. He said, will this Kaaba not become the Kaaba anymore? Will it lose its sanctity? Will it lose the fact that it's the house of God? Even though people aren't going to Hajj anymore, people aren't praying. They said, no, of course not. It will remain regardless. Remember when we said, Inna Allah ghaniyun ala alameen, Allah Azza wa Jal is your God, whether you accept He's your God or not. The Kaaba is the Qibla, whether you accept it or not. And he said, likewise is the Imamah. I am the Imam. Whether the people want me or not, I am the Imam. This is why when we say the first Khalif, yes, the first Khalif is Abu Bakr. Khalif al-Nas, Khalif al-Saqifa. He's the one that took the Khilafah from the Saqifa. But the Khalif that is designated and chosen from the Supreme Creator is Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. Whether the people come give him allegiance or not. So what is the purpose behind giving this allegiance? It's symbolic, firstly. It's symbolic to show that you have obedience to this leadership. That when I give allegiance, it's a bit harder. See, sometimes someone says, promise me that you won't do this thing. And you say, okay. And they say, no. Say, I promise I will not do this. They want you to hear you say it. Okay, I promise I will not do such and such. Don't you want to hear it? That way you get that itma'nan. Because Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says, La ra'i liman la yuta'. You could sit there and talk all day if no one's going to obey you. If you don't have an opinion, no one really cares. Imam Ali alayhi salam also in Nahj al-Balagha says, I have so much to tell you, yet no one has anything that can carry it. Or you know, as the Quran says in a verse, وَتَعِهَا أُذُنٌ وَعِيَا. Sometimes you can talk all day. Some people don't comprehend. Not that they don't comprehend, they're not ready to accept. But once I give my allegiance, once I say I am obedient to you, I have to do something extra to get it. After inqut al-bay'ah, I have to break this covenant. This allegiance is much harder. So the Imam managed to get the allegiance. The narrations say the allegiance was from tens of thousands. Some narrations say about 80,000 Kufans, not 12,000, 80,000 gave allegiance. That Muslim was in the house of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, and people would come and give allegiance. Now the letter that Imam Hussein alayhi salam sent with the Muslim Aqil wasn't just any kind of letter. Alaykum salam. He says, وَإِنِّي بَعِثْ إِلَيْكُمْ أَخِي. First he says, I have sent to you, Imam Hussein in the letter to the people, my brother. Yani adna, the least of this meaning is his brother in faith. That's the least of it that you can accept as a meaning. وَابْنَ عَمِّي, and he is also my cousin. But then the last term is a limitless term. He says, وَثِقَتِي min ahlu bayti. When you say wathiqati, now if you ever see someone says to you, for example, this person's wakil Sayyid Fulan or Sheikh Fulan, they don't usually have wakila. They've got what's called an ijazi for khums, that this person has permission to take khums from you, or this person has permission to do such and such. That they have what's called, have what's called a limited authority, or they are entrusted with a limited amount of power from the marja'iyya, from the Islamic leadership, that's the jurisprudential position there. Now, in this case of Muslim, Imam Hussein alayhi salam does not give it that limit. He says, وَثِقَتِي min ahli bayti, that this man is my trustee in everything, in all my affairs. Then in other words, it is as if I am there. Do you imagine who Muslim Aqil alayhi salam is, that if the Imam is telling the people as if you are talking to me directly, and basically his order is my order. What he says to do, for you to do, you must do. And this was one of the biggest confusions there. You know, all those people that sit there, and the linguists, they sit there and go, I wonder what thiqati means. And that's what the first problem that Muslim had, was people didn't stand with him, because some said, hold on, I'll wait for the Imam to come. You know those people that say, hold on, I'll wait for the Imam to come. When you have been given instructions from your Imam that this person, and it's not just any person, I've already given you the introduction. This is a person that the Prophet has spoken about. This is a person that stood in the ranks of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is a person that's been with Imam Hussein alayhi salam for the last 20 years from when he left Kufa. They know who he is. There's no doubt about him when he enters. And they know that the letter is authentic and from the Imam, yet there is some confusion. Yet most of the big figures involved remain on the side of Muslim. Only a small amount of them that later joined the Thawrat al-Tawabin, eventually after the martyrdom, are the ones that become what you say, those that are repentant and regret what they've done by not giving the support to Muslim as they should have. Now, this is the representative of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, a man whom the Prophet swears by and says to Aqil, he swears that this man has a man of such a caliber from him. This is Muslim Aqil, and he's a man that stood with Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He's a man that when he enters Kufa, has an opportunity to dispose of the tyrant present. Now, as we get to that point, we'll work on it. Now, Muslim has arrived in Kufa with this letter. He's in the house of Muhtar al-Thaqafi, and people are coming and giving allegiance to him. Now, at the time that he's there, there is a ruler of Kufa. And this ruler is not a good man, but he's weak, he's soft. And Yazid is brutal. So this person doesn't represent Yazid. He was there from the time of Muawiyah. So this guy was on, Muawiyah was not, Muawiyah wasn't the open tyrant. He was more of a hidden tyrant. Muawiyah wasn't openly drinking like Yazid was. Muawiyah wasn't openly committing the crimes that Yazid was. Muawiyah portrayed the image that he's a Khalif and he's a good man, just as his predecessors. They all had that image where we're actually doing good. Yazid was the first one to take it all off, and show people what's really under there. The first one to expose the whole story. He's the first one to show the rot that existed for the last 40 years since the usurpation of the Khilafah. Now, this Nu'man ibn al-Bashir, Nu'man was a soft person. And while he was there, Muslim was going about his business and growing with stature, and Yazid knew he had to suppress this. He had to stop this. At this time, Muslims sent letters back to Imam Hussein telling them that everything's all right. You come here, the people will support you. Now, just as Imam Hussein has shown his compassion and kindness in placing a man like Muslim there, Yazid, who is malevolent, who is someone that is malicious, has to show his malice with who he needs to place. And he wants to remove An-Nu'man. Now, he thinks about who can he replace him with. Because don't forget, this is just the beginning of his Khilafah. When he's taking the Khilafah, he doesn't have that many supporters. Because Banu Umayyah, like I said, they're all vying for power. He needs to establish himself on the ground. So there was a servant of Muawiyah. His name was Sirjan. Sirjan was a Christian advisor, that he would sit there and he'd give an opinion, just as Umar ibn Khattab had a Jewish advisor, which is very well known, that he have someone that would tell him how to run the affairs of the Muslims, as you do. You know, if you want to run the affairs of the Muslims, you get a non-Muslim to help you. Which, yeah, as you know, I'm being sarcastic. So Muawiyah's got this Sirjan with him, who's giving him advice on how to run things. So Yazid says, bring him in, I'll ask him, who do I put in power? Sirjan's also cunning. He's a cunning man. He's not someone that is easily outwitted. And he knows Yazid he needs to sell Yazid the story. He wants to sell Yazid who to use. So he says to him, would you accept the advice of your father had he still been alive? If he just came out of the grave now, and Yazid said, of course I would accept the advice of my father. Well, he said, your father has written that the only remedy for Kufa, the only one that can control them, is Ziyad. And if he's not there, then his son Ubaydullah bin Ziyad. These people are the only ones that can control Kufa. Now, Yazid wasn't too pleased or too happy with this idea, because Ubaydullah bin Ziyad opposed Yazid's Khilafah. He's one of the people that stood against him. So there was a bad taste between them. They weren't happy with one another. But Yazid said, I need this, because Muslim will get too powerful. So he sent a letter to Ubaydullah to go to Kufa. Now, it wasn't an easy job, because Kufa was full of supporters for Muslim Aqil. And the people were all awaiting the entry of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So Ubaydullah bin Ziyad entered Kufa and he was covered. His face was covered in a mask. And he only entered it with several people. Could you imagine this? There wasn't an army he came with. He came with several amount of people. I think half a dozen. There wasn't a big number of people he entered with. He came in covered, and people actually thought it was the coming of Imam Hussein. So they allowed him in. He went all the way to Qasr al-Imara. He went to the palace of the actual ruler there, An-Nu'man, to oust him, to kick him out. And the moment he entered, he assumed control from there. Now, he had a servant there called Ma'qal. Ma'qal was like him, also a person that was elusive and witty and a criminal in every way. And he was a spy for him. He used to hang out with the followers of Muslim, pretend he was one of them, to find out where Muslims' whereabouts were. The Muslim hadn't come out yet. He wasn't out publicly for everyone to see. He was at the house of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. But when Ubaydullah bin Ziyad arrived in Kufa, Muslim moved from the house of Mukhtar to the house of Hani ibn Urwa, and this is where he remained, and no one knew of this. So he needed to know. Ubaydullah bin Ziyad wanted to know where he had gone. Now, at first, in order to get the people on his side, how did he get people on his side? See, he used several tactics. As today, how do you think people in today's world get others on their side? They use several tactics. For example, when I was a child, I remember watching a movie called Escape from Sobibor. And this movie, honestly, because when you're a child, everything affects the way you think more than when you're an adult. And this movie made me sweat, and it was a scary movie because it was a movie based upon a concentration camp in Nazi Germany. From a young age, we knew that a Jew was someone that was persecuted and hated and murdered, and they were an oppressed race. And they make you feel sympathy. Imagine they made movies of all the crimes that the Zionists have committed against the Palestinians. How many movies that they can make out of that as well. Now, in this way, they wean you to feel in this manner towards them with their movies and with their television, advertising, toys, everything. Even people, you have to realize even the games you play. I remember when they had the not the role playing game, sorry, I don't know what they actually call them, the ones where you actually have two armies, like Command and Conquer games. Well, the first game that they had, the Command and Conquer, which they made in the mid-90s, were two armies. One was called GDI, which represented the Global Defense Initiative, and it was built up of countries like the US, England, and all the white people countries, And the other one was called the Brotherhood of Nod. Notice the word brotherhood. So it was a hit on Islam. And it was all the developing countries. So while you're playing this game, you already know this guy is the bad guy. And you're even told in the most recent game, I think it's Battlefield, the latest Battlefield, the actual game is fighting with Iran. So they wean you to get ready for what they plan to do in the future. They have the people in this manner. Now, this is how they do this with propaganda. What Ubaydullah bin Ziyad did, he started paying off the people that could be paid off, threatening the people that could be threatened, and he made up this idea, the same propaganda used today, of an imaginary army. It's an army that never existed. He said there is an army that's been dispatched from Sham, from Damascus, and when this army gets here, it's going to run through the people of Kufa. It will not spare your men. It will take the modesty of your women. And the people were in fear of this army that did not exist. That was his wild card. That was the card that he was playing, and everyone was in fear of this army coming. So what would happen is that that Aqil was sent to Masjid al-Kufa because they needed to know where Muslims' whereabouts is, because that was their last problem in order to take control again. Aqil sits with Muslim ibn Awsaja al-Asadi, who was one of the companions of Imam Hussein that was martyred, and sitting with him for a while, finally convinces him that he is a believer and a follower, and eventually he gets to meet Muslim Aqil, and he meets him at the house of Hani ibn Urwa. So Aqil returns and tells Ubaydullah bin Ziyad the whereabouts of Muslim. Due to this, Ubaydullah has Hani ibn Urwa arrested. Now, once Hani ibn Urwa is arrested, the Muslim has no choice but to take all the people that support him out into the street in front of the palace of the Imara to release Hani. This is his wild card. This is now his turn to be able to overpower them. But then this story of the imaginary army and the wealth that is used starts to make the army of Muslim Aqil fall apart. In fact, it gets to the time of Salat al-Maghrib and Muslim enters to pray. And you imagine the numbers that were with him. At the point, it says, at the beginning outside was standing with him 4,000 men. When he enters the masjid, only 30 are praying behind him. That's how many disappeared in an instance. He finishes Salat al-Maghrib to turn around and he finds that there is only three people behind him. As he stands, even the two run, and he's remained ones behind him. As he arrives at the door of the masjid, and actual narrations, it tells you from which door to door he has moved, there is only one person remaining behind him, and this guy then leaves. Now, Muslim hasn't been in Kufa for about 20 years. He doesn't know the streets. You know, if you have flown overseas for 2-3 years and come back, and you see there's a difference. Imagine 20 years in a time where the Islamic world had been developing and things had been changing. Muslim is out in the streets. There is no one with him. He doesn't know anyone. There's no one that he can talk to. There's no one that will help him in any way. So he walks until he arrives at a house where he sees an older woman standing at this house. So he stands before the house, and this woman, the mu'min has a good feel about a place. He moves towards there, and this woman is a good woman. Her name is Tawa. She is of the followers of Rasulullah, the follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and one that would submit to God and follow the will of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So when she sees him, she asks him, she doesn't know who he is. She asks him, do you have any need? By standing, he said, he asks her if you could give me some water to drink. So she goes in, gives him water. He drinks the water. After he drinks, he remains standing. She said, I gave you water, you drank. Why are you still standing here? And then he says to her, Ya Amatallah, O servant of God. He says, what do you want me to do? I've got nowhere to go. And then she looks at him for a moment, and then she notices that he's a man of piety. But she doesn't want a foreign man standing in front of her house. So she says to him, I do not give you permission to stand before my house. And he said to her, she said, you have a family, go to your family. He said, no, I don't have a family. I don't have anywhere to go. She says, who are you? He says, I am Muslim and Aqil. The people of this city have betrayed me. And when she finds out that he's Muslim and Aqil, she says, you are Muslim and Aqil. You are the cousin of Imam Hussein. You are the one that Imam has sent here. She says, enter my house. May my parents be at ransom for you. She was a woman that truly understood who he was. And it says in the narration that this woman would continuously serve him in the night. She offered him water to drink. She offered him food to eat. He refused. He kept the night, she says, in worship. He was worshipping the entire night. But she had a son, and this son was one of the offspring, evil offspring that some people, God forbid, might have. Someone that was associated with sin, someone that was working with the government. He was a spy. And this son of hers found out that Muslim was in the house. So he left in the morning and immediately went to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad to get a reward and says, I have found the whereabouts of Muslim. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad sends an army under the command of Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath al-Kindi. This man leads an army towards the house of Tawa. And at this point, they stand and they call him out. Muslim Aqil comes out and he fights them. He continuously fights them, and eventually they overcome him. When they overcome him, they arrest him and they bring him in. This is an example of the representative of Yazid and the representative of Imam Hussein. Now the representative of Imam Hussein, as he's been taken in, he begins to weep. And they look at him, they say, you have fought so many of our men and killed so many, and now you weep? He says, I don't weep over myself. He says, I weep over Abu Abdullah al-Hussein because I've sent him a letter confirming that this place is safe and how your people have betrayed me. So Ubaydullah bin Ziyad sits forward and begins to curse Amir al-Mu'mineen and curse al-Hasan and al-Hussein. And then Muslim Aqil turns and curses Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, and he curses his family. So he is taken to the top of the palace of the Imara. And there, عظم الله لكم الأجر, he is beheaded and thrown to the floor of the Imara. At this point, then his body is thrown, cut into pieces, and spread everywhere. So people can know. And this was the first martyr in protecting, the first martyr in the protection of the message of God in the seerah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us the opportunity to visit the shrine of Muslim ibn Aqil in Kufa. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal for the shafa'ah of Muslim on the Day of Judgment, and most importantly, to hasten the reappearance of our Imam. We'll leave the dua inshallah for Shaykh Malallah when he comes in. وهذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.